Let's be friends.
Have you not?
Here we go.
And greetings, everyone. Welcome back to the Ambassador Wing and episode 4 of the Ultra Retro Podcast. Hope y'all are having a awesome day wherever you're at, wherever you're watching this at on YouTube. And today we are going to be bringing you our discussion on another classic from the 1930s, specifically a very iconic film of the 1930s, done in glorious Technicolor. The Adventures of Robin Hood, starring Errol Flynn, Olivia de Havilland, Claude Rains, and Basil Rathbone, who might be better known as the indomitable British detective Sherlock Holmes, and Claude Rains. Well, we know him from, of course, Casablanca, and of course, as the Invisible Man. So, got today with me two alums of the Ambassador Wing. You know him, you love him. If you don't, what's wrong with you? Miss Alicia Victoria Parker and her better half, Mr. Jack Beers. My friends, good to see you both. Glad to have you back again, and looking forward to the discussion. So, let's jump in. The Adventures of Robin Hood came out in 1938 through what is now known as Warner Brothers Studios, and is a first attempt at, or rather a second attempt at doing a adaptation of the legend of the man who was known as Robin of Locksley. So, guys, let's get going. Your thoughts,
this
Rob?
It's got two directors, and this movie, so it's in Technicolor, like you mentioned. So they had 11 Technicolor cameras at the time, and they used all 11 of them to just film this one film.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, you mentioned this had two directors. The one that actually did the movie was... One second, I got my notes here. Shoot, where is it? One second. Sorry, guys.
That's fine.
I got several pages of notes here, thanks to Madam Ambassador. Okay. Nope, that's not the page. Where's the page? Oh, for heaven's sakes. This is going to drive me nuts. Well, the actual director was Michael Kurtz. Eric Wolfgang Cornhold did the composing, and the fight arranger was Fred Cavins, who also worked on Captain Blood. And here's the interesting thing. The reason that the other director was booted off of the production was because his direction of the movie was less than stellar. The higher ups at Warner Brothers thought that the fights were lethargically directed or filmed, and that the movie in general was just boring. So they brought in Michael Kurtz to make it better. Well, obviously, he did. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing about Mr. Michael Kurtz is he had what you would call a somewhat adversarial relationship with a lot of the actors that he worked with, and notably Mr. Errol Flynn, because this was not the first movie that Errol Flynn and Michael Kurtz worked on together as director and actor.
Yes, I think the first one was Black Arrow, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think that's right. And yet, even though they didn't particularly like each other, and the actors and the director didn't get along well, the movie turned out very well and was very successful at the box office, especially considering this took place during the height of the Great Depression and just before the United States got into World War II.
Yes.
So, but what we have is this movie is called The Adventures of Robin Hood. It's almost set up like a novel, a book, because you have a page of text that introduces what's happening, and then you have several scenes that explain or depict what happens. So, it's almost like extended version of a old like a 1930s or 1940s serial, but it's one long movie.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's an hour and 40-minute serial, but it's all one movie rather than several separate episodes. So, guys, your thoughts on any of the points I brought up so far?
So I've read the novelization of Robin Hood, and this one is the closest to it because it talks about Robin being a lord, and basically we find out about how he became an outlaw in the first place. We always assume it was because of his rivalry with the prince, but it was because he shot a royal deer, which was illegal in that area. He kills it, which he later brings onto the table for Prince John. Say, hey, I'm offering this peace offering, and dumps it on the table, knocks out like 10 people along the way.
Uses the deer as a weapon.
Yes, but that was illegal. But it also mentions about that. It also touches on his nephew Will Scarlet as well, and it also talks about his relationship with Little John, how that came about, and how he was defeated by Little John, and also with Friar Tuck.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing because in other versions of Robin Hood's origin and so on, he bests Little John.
Yes.
Like in the parody movie that I think we all know and love, Robin Hood Men in Tights, directed by Mel Brooks. He
Yes.
he knocks Little John into a very shallow creek, and he's like, "Help me! Help me! Help me!" And he's not even drowning. But in one that you and I discussed a while back, Alicia, Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, they end up in a massive brawl going down a series of rapids, and they somehow both survive. Thankfully, obviously, there wouldn't be much of a movie. But in this version, Robin Hood is bested. And he's like, you know what? You bested me, but I want you to fight with me. And Little John obliges, obviously, or John Little as he's known
Yes.
as. And then, of course,
Little
you've got
John is the rapper.
Yeah, it's John Little. Yeah, Little John the Rapper. I know who you're talking about. And then, of course, you have the fight between, and I will say this, for a 1930s movie, the sword play, the choreography for the sword play, the fight scenes was actually really well done. Now,
Yes.
obviously, these are, I would guess, tin or aluminum swords, but it works.
Yeah, that choreography helped him with the. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but with the
No, it's
Star
fine. Go
Wars
ahead.
choreography with that, it helped him inspired to do the choreography with the lightsaber duels that we would later see in Star Wars 40 years later as well.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the thing you have to remember, side note, Lucas is a fan and a grew up watching the old 1930s and 1940s serials, so he would know that, and that would obviously influence him. But
Yes.
yeah, very good point. The other factor of this is this movie was done on a bit of a shoestring budget because, well, as I said, the U.S. wasn't yet in World War II, but they were helping Great Britain with their defense of the island against the Nazis and so on. So Warner Brothers, being a somewhat patriotic, or I would say a patriotic studio, and the Runners being a patriotic studio, realized, one, we're in the middle of a depression, and two, the U.S. is trying to help Great Britain with the war. They're like, we're going to do this. We'll give you a decent budget, but there's stuff that we're going to have to cut. There's stuff we're not going to be able to shoot. There's stuff that's not going to make it in. And yet they still produce a cohesive story, a cohesive movie that was obviously very entertaining. There's actually, let's see here. I had that page. One second, guys. Okay, we were actually talking about the choreography, so I'll just go to this point here. During one of the fight scenes, Errol Flynn was jabbed by an actor who was using an unprotected sword. He asked why he didn't have a guard on the point. The other player apologized and explained that the director, Michael Kurtz, had instructed him to remove the safety feature in order to make the action more exciting. Flynn reportedly climbed up a gantry where Kurtz was standing next to the cameras, took him by the throat, and asked him, did he find that exciting enough? So,
That sounds like Errol Flynn, totally.
yeah,
This one.
really much so. Um, here's in regards to, let's see. Um, the stunt players and actors were paid an additional $150 for having per arrow being shot at them.
Hmm.
So there were safety precautions taken, but Michael Kurtz, he kind of played fast and loose, but thankfully nobody lost life or limb. So that's the positive.
Right.
So, um, Jack, any points that you want to bring up in particular in regards to the movie?
Um, like it was really fun to watch. I know it was well received at the time because the budget was 2 million,
Mm-hmm.
and it ended up making about 4 million, which at the time was like, I think they said it was like the fourth highest grossing movie of that year
Yeah,
or
because
something
it
like that.
came out in '38. Go ahead,
I,
Jack.
I think fourth or 10th, one of the two. I can't remember which one for sure.
Right, right. Eight. No, I'm sorry. It was the eighth highest grossing film.
Okay.
Yeah. I know that it won Academy Awards for Best Art Direction, Best Film Editing, and Best Original Score. It was nominated for Outstanding Production, and it's also part of the National Film Registry.
Well, because the interesting thing is, okay, here's um the trouble with the production, why they switched the directors. When the studio saw the dailies and were horrified to find that Kingsley, the original director, was delivering an unimaginatively filmed, largely paced film with action sequences that, by all accounts, were simply abysmal, the studio immediately fired Kingsley and replaced him with Michael Kurtz, regarded as a much more capable director, but one with a notoriously uncompromising attitude toward direct actors. As a result, production uh, possessed much more progress much more to the studio's satisfaction, but tempers frequently flare between Kurtz and not only Flynn, but also co-star Olivia de Havilland and Claude Rains. It eventually culminated in Flynn coming to blows with Kurtz after the latter failed to tell Flynn that his opponent in a sword fight was using a real sword, nearly getting him injured. In the end, Kurtz was responsible for an estimated 70% plus of the finished film, normally enough that Kingsley wouldn't have been entitled to a screen credit, but the studio gave him one anyway, largely to keep Flynn happy, which nonetheless ended up being a smashing hit at the box office and arguably Flynn's most famous film. So, um, another point. Flynn enjoyed working with the sophisticated, easygoing William King's uh, Kylie. Sorry, I've been pronouncing the name wrong. Besides the temperamental and but despised the temperamental and demanding Kurtz. Problems between the two were reportedly exacerbated by Flynn's casual approach to production schedules and scene preparation, as well as his reputation for a bad memory for dialogue. It's hard to believe that, considering all the problems that were going on behind the cameras, the movie came out as good as it did.
True.
Yeah.
And getting into a little bit more into the movie itself, the story. Claude Rains, up until this point, he had done. I think Ventures of Robin Hood or post dates The Invisible Man. Obviously,
Mhm.
predates Casablanca. Him as Prince John, he was absolutely perfect for this role.
Yeah.
And granted, the prior role that he played as the scientist in The Invisible Man wasn't quite as mad or slimy. The way he portrays Prince John, he's very slimy, very deceitful, very rotten, and but at the same time, you can't help but you can't take your eyes off of him or anything when he's playing this part.
Mhm.
So, I mean, obviously we have two antagonists in this movie. We have Prince John. We have Guy of Gisborne. The Sheriff of Nottingham is almost an afterthought.
Yes,
Pretty
he
He
much.
is.
isn't the prominent character that he was in other productions like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Robin Hood Men in Tights. But that was more of a comedic take. But still, um,
So
you're gonna go ahead, Jack.
so we were me and Alicia were talking about this when we watched The Invisible Man recently.
Hmm.
Um, so out of all of those Universal monsters that came out at the time,
Hmm.
he was the only one that wasn't like the misunderstood monster. He really was a monster. Um,
Hmm.
Frankenstein's monster was misunderstood. Dracula was just trying to get a little bit of food. He was hungry. You know,
And I would say he was a bit thirsty for the ladies of London, but
mhm,
Yes.
yes, as well as the werewolf. But
mhm,
but this guy here, he was like evil. Like once he realized what he can do as an invisible man, you know, he
mhm.
decided he was just going to be evil. And so, I
Whereas,
mean, he,
go,
which is why we chose him when we for our little display thing, because it was like he was the only one out of that group who really was evil.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, you could make the argument that Imhotep was also evil, but he was also very much in love with an ox on the moon or an oxonomen, as they say it in the
Right.
original Boris Karloff version. But he does do some rather evil things to get his lady. So,
True.
but your point is well said. Um, what I liked about this particular version of the Tale of Robin Hood or the Adventures of Robin Hood is there is a adversarial relationship in the beginning between Robin and Maid Marian,
Hmm.
and over time she realizes he isn't the scoundrel, he is the rogue. He was forced to be a scoundrel and a rogue, you could,
Hmm.
if you wanted to qualify him as that, but he was a lord. He had lands, he had a keep, he had people that he had people in his keep and everything that he was supposed to look after. And then Richard Lionheart goes off to fight in the Crusades, which he himself at the end laments because he forced one of his own subjects to take up the sword to defend his kingdom. He made essentially all of England his responsibility.
Hmm.
And you see it and everything in the scene where they capture um, Prince John and Guy Gisborne and the sheriff and of course her, and then she sees the merry men feasting, but then she also sees the encampment for the people that have been wounded, the families that have been kicked out of their homes because of the unfair taxes, and then she realizes this guy isn't that bad. He's actually very noble, and that's the trigger for her. Now, the love story is kind of truncated, but I think also that was due to production limitations with the budget and so on. So they couldn't do as many scenes to build up the idea that she was falling in love with Robin or he was falling in love with her or vice versa. But I think for what we got there, it works. So, what were your guys' thoughts on that?
So it's interesting with Married Marian. This is the only version that we actually see her last name not just Maid Marian. We see her last name as Fitzwater in this case, and
Yeah, exactly.
she holds her own in this. So in the actual stories of Robin Hood, there is no Maid Marian. So
Mm-hmm.
for them to create this character, Maid Marian, she's similar to. So we watched a little bit of the 1922 version of this,
Mm-hmm.
and she's almost similar, but she's
Right.
different too. Because
Yeah.
Yeah.
honestly, Robin at first is like scared of women.
That
he's
that was yeah. So he literally tells the king that he's afraid of women.
he
That he
says,
doesn't he doesn't want to
I'm
approach a
afeared
woman,
of women.
and so the king surrounds him with women.
all the women in the village practically.
And he runs away, and for like 10 seconds, it becomes Austin Powers opening.
Yes,
Except in
but
this case, he's running away because he's legitimately afraid. He's not just playing
Yes,
with him.
yes,
right, exactly. So this version with Maid Marian and him, now Olivia is awesome in this. Olivia de Havilland, she's
Oh,
a total queen in this.
yes.
And she does it superbly. I mean, she holds her own where she's not afraid to fight with alongside Robin and everything and say, "Why are you doing this?" And he's like, "Well, there's a reason why I'm doing this." And she's like, "Oh, you're just wanting it for greed and all that." He's like, "No, no, 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 no. Step back and watch what I'm doing." And her lady in waiting, so to speak, you might say, she's also an
Yes.
icon of cinema as
Hmm.
well. Una, I believe Connor, I believe it is. She did a lot of classic horror films, and it's kind of crazy to see her a little
Wait a
subdued in
minute.
this one.
Wasn't she the innkeeper's wife in The Invisible Man?
She
yes,
is.
Okay,
yes.
I thought so. I thought so. I wasn't sure, but I thought, wait a minute, I've seen her somewhere before. So okay, all right,
Yeah,
Yes.
okay,
she's in a few of those movies.
But normally she
yeah.
has that annoying voice where you can't stand her. But this one, when you see with Maid Mary, she's actually calm. She's actually chill. She's like, "Oh, Lady
Mhm.
Mary, whatever you need, my dear," kind of thing.
Well, and she's very protective of Marion as well and
Yes,
everything. But then
Hmm.
but then her and Much, they have a bit of a love story too with that life
Yes.
because Much realizes he ain't much to look at, and Bess is obviously up in years, but you know what? They're cute. They're very
Yes.
cute together.
They are.
They're very sweet and charming.
Hmm.
The interesting here's I don't know if either one of you know this, but for everybody the audience, Olivia de Havilland and Errol Flynn actually had very strong feelings for one another, but the fact was they were both married, and they
okay.
were both very
Hmm.
devoted to their spouses, and they never acted on it. But this was not the only movie that they'd done together. They actually did several movies together, and it's a real testament to old Hollywood, the fact that these two actors who were by no means bad looking, but were also very talented. They had feelings for each other, very strong romantic feelings for each other, but their feelings for their spouses overrode their lesser instincts. Let's put it that way. And
Right.
it's when you see actors in Hollywood nowadays, and you see all the divorce and the dysfunction and the relationships and so on amongst the different celebrity couples, and then you look at these two who work together so well, but also have feelings for each other, but they never acted on it. It's kind of telling of how Hollywood has kind of declined in a way.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So, but getting along with this, Guy of Gisborne, played by Basil Rathbone, he actually should have been the sheriff of Nottingham, and they should have made the guy who played sheriff of Nottingham Guy of Gisborne. Because here's the interesting thing: if you notice how Basil Rathbone plays Gisborne, you would almost get the impression. I think maybe it's not inaccurate that Alan Rinkman stylized his performance as Nottingham a bit after Rathbone's performance as Guy of Gisborne. I don't know if
I can see that.
either one of you could see that or not and everything, but Rathbone's performance is so bloodthirsty and so vindictive, but yet he's the other lords and even the sheriff and Prince John are calling him out. Well, you keep saying you're going to capture Robin Hood. You're going to capture him. Why haven't you done it?
Hmm.
You're a blowhard. You are nothing but sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Yep.
You haven't captured Robin Hood. He's outwitted you every freaking turn practically. They have to set up this elaborate archery tournament and basically completely surround him to capture him.
Yep.
That's the only
Yeah.
way they can. That's the only way they can get their hands on Robin Hood.
Yeah, and along the way, Maid Marian gets arrested too. I think this is the only adaptation where Marian actually gets arrested herself because normally
Yeah.
she's like, oh no, Robin, I have to save Robin. But this one, he's like, oh, she's intrigued by this. Arrest her too. And I'm like, what? They're gonna arrest Marian, but she had
Hmm.
nothing to do with this.
Yeah, and here's the interesting thing. She says only the king can sentence me to death, and Prince John's like, well, I'm about to be the king.
Hmm.
And you're like, oh crap, she could actually die.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, she's down there in that cell, and Robin's out there on the cart, and the people are actually trying to save him, and obviously they succeed because here's the interesting thing about Marian's part in this. She doesn't do any actual fighting, but she plays more of a spy within the court, which actually I think
Mm-hmm.
works better. And everything. You don't have to have physical strength or be able to use a sword to be able to be of use during a combat situation or a dangerous situation. You have to have the courage and you have to have the will to act. That's her strengths.
Hmm.
Whereas
Yeah.
Robin, he has a bit of both. He has the wits, but he also has the physical ability to act in combat. So, speaking of combat, the fight we've mentioned the fight scenes in passing, but of the various fight scenes we get in this, what would you say are the to rank them? What would be the best of them, or to rank them?
I think the top one for me is when they're going on the spiral staircase because you see
Yes.
them fighting at their turn and everything like that. Because that's a very unique approach because you see it from that angle. Because normally it's like, oh, they're on the ground fighting hand to hand, but this one they're like having to turn and make sure they're avoiding obstacles along the way, which is like, oh, are they going to be able to hit the rock? Are they going to hit each other? What's going to happen in this case? And it looks very real. And I think in some cases it actually was real, like we were mentioning earlier as well.
Well, and the
Hmm.
fact that Errol Flynn did all but one of his own stunts, that's
Right.
I mean, granted they didn't have the budget for stunt work, stunt people and everything. The only stunt he did not do was he was scaling the side of the castle wall, and I believe that was when he was going up to Marian's chamber.
Yeah, because I think hit it by the obstructed by the bushes, so we wouldn't know it was him or not in that case.
Yeah. Now, for me, I think my favorite fight scene of this, and it's not even the end fight scene, although the setup for the end fight scene, or the end is a good one, but it has to be um, I want to say where he comes in with the deer,
Oh yes, that's a good one. That's a very
Yeah.
good one.
but
I was gonna say
I
that one actually.
okay. I would have to say my favorite fight scene in the whole film is is actually the fight between Much and the assassin that they send to kill King Richard, because it's very mono a mono. It's very visceral. It's in a interesting setting. It's not inside a castle or anything. It's out in the wild. So that for me was my favorite fight scene, and it's only two people.
Hmm.
So let me ask you both: how do you feel about the change where we don't see Richard escaping from his imprisonment, but he shows up with a few of his knights in England, but he's undercover? Because in other interpretations or other versions or adaptations of the tale of Robin Hood, we don't see this. Richard doesn't show up until the end.
Hmm.
So, what'd y'all think of that change?
I mean, it sort of paves the way for where we see him hidden in the shadows. Normally, we say, "Well, where's Richard?" And he's like, "Hold it right there, John." He's like, "Who's telling me what to do? You're not my boss of me." And you see him reveal the hood, and it becomes a common theme at that point for the other Robin adaptation to do that. And I think it would be even though Robin is a fictional character, I think this would be a historical accuracy in this case for that to
Mhm.
happen.
Well, yeah, because we know that Richard Lionhearted did go. I don't know which crusade exactly, but he did it. He was involved in one of the crusades.
Yeah, the first ones, I
Anything?
think.
Yeah, it was one. I think it was one of the first two or three. Richard Lionheart was involved in
Third
the. Was it the
Third
third
Crusade.
crusade?
Third
Okay,
one, okay.
okay. Um, the actor who portrayed him, his name was Ian something, but I can't remember his last name. I would have to say, yeah, I loved or Sean Connery, and I did, yeah, obviously, I loved Patrick Stewart, and as their two cameo appearances in the other two Robin Hood films. But this guy, he had that extra something that really made you feel like, okay, this is Richard the Lionhearted. Although the real life Richard Lionhearted, mm, he did some questionable things. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it.
Right.
Right.
But for a fictional version of Richard, this guy really carries it. He has the voice, he has the presence.
It was
He
easy
obviously,
to tell, even though he was disguised as just a peasant. It was easy to tell
mhm.
that that was him, just
Well,
just
not
because
to,
of his demeanor.
yeah, really. Um, and I will say this also: the fact that most of the actors did their own horse work, it was a really nice touch. Here's a little fun fact: the horse that Olivia de Havilland used for her horse, a very famous old school cowboy bought that horse,
Ooh,
and
okay.
it was a very notable horse. It was actually Roy Rogers who bought that horse, and that horse would
Oh,
later go on to be Trigger.
Right.
okay, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
So
that is Trigger.
so
And Trigger would be later stuffed later on after Roy Rogers' death and everything too, as well.
yeah, that's true. You have to wonder, did Olivia de Havilland ever go visit the Roy Rogers Museum, and they're like, oh, that was my horse.
Possibly.
Um,
As long as they're not using it as a stable.
yeah,
Brian Griffin, Family Guy reference.
yeah, exactly, yeah. His mom being stuffed.
Yeah.
Um, the interesting thing was this movie went through a lot of casting. Here's just a few examples. James Cagney was originally cast as Robin Hood, but
You
he
dirty
but he
rat, you. Can't picture him that. Nope.
Douglas Fairbanks turned down the role of Robin Hood because he didn't want people to think he was trying to fill his dad's shoes, because Douglas Fairbanks Sr. played Robin Hood in the 1922 version.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Orson Welles was offered the role as Friar Tuck or King Richard, but he turned them both down.
Okay.
And um, David Niven turned down the role of Will Scarlet as he was on holiday at the time. Um, the ending that exists now in the film was not the one that was originally written. In the original ending, King Richard and his forces helped Prince John and Guy of Gisborne help battle Prince John and Guy of Gisborne's forces outside the castle. The ending was scrapped because it was too expensive to film at the time.
Ooh.
So, let's see. Claude Rains revealed to his daughter that he enjoyed playing Prince John. That he'd by using, okay, later revealed to his daughter that he enjoyed playing Prince John as a homosexual by using subtle mannerisms. I don't know how
Okay.
much of that might actually be true, but either way. So, because that's, let's see, the original script was loaded with ridiculous purple prose, which Kurtz thankfully insisted to be removed entirely. I think that meant there was a lot of more flowery language than was actually needed for the movie. So, um, this is obviously an older film. So for those that may have never seen this movie, what would the two of you say would be an incentive for somebody to revisit this or to visit this for the first time that never may have done so?
Mm,
I feel like Earl Flynn, just watching him uh, act, he's really alive in this one. I would say, like the energy that he brings to the character, uh, I feel like is worth watching. It's a very early film. It's from 1938. It's a very early film, but it feels like it's ahead of its time.
right.
It feels like it's ahead. It could be the Technicolor. It could be just the way. But I feel like when it comes to Robin Hood films, that's the definitive Robin Hood film.
Yeah. What about
Yeah.
you, Alicia?
I would say so. Marion's a strong female character for this time. I mean, it's unusual to
Yes.
see a strong female lead in the 1930s because she would
Hmm.
later show up in Gone with the Wind. And unfortunately, she was a secondary character in that one, but she's still a superb actress.
Oh
She still
yes.
holds her own and she's still humble. But in this one, she's humble, but she's also feisty as well to say, "Oh, who are you, Robin? What do you think you're doing?" And yet she still holds her own against him to say, "Hey, I can be your equal in many ways. I'm going to spy. I'm going to defend you. Whatever John's saying, I'm not going to buy it."
Right.
Yeah. I would, from my perspective, I mean, this is a movie that I grew up with. I would say that's true for both of you as well. It's a movie that's got a little bit of everything. It's obviously an action adventure movie first and foremost. It's a
Mm-hmm.
bit of English folklore as well, which I think there has been research done to see if there ever was a Robin of Locksley. It's been somewhat inconclusive if there ever actually was.
Right.
You know, it's this the legend of Robin Hood is owned up to being something that was imported from France, that there was a nobleman in France that did something similar, but the places and the names and so on were changed for a British audience, obviously. It's a movie about chivalry. It's a movie about fighting against injustice. It's a film about fighting against tyranny because, well, Prince John and Guy of Gisborne and the other lords were tyrants. The other notable thing about this movie, and I think was also a bit ahead of its time, talking about the division between Saxons and Normans,
Yes.
because Robin and his band are majority Saxon. Maid Marian is actually a Norman,
Mm-hmm.
but she puts that aside and she's like, I want to be with this man. I love him. I find him to be noble. I find him to be just. I find him to be very loving.
Hmm.
And even Richard at the end says, I will rule equally and fairly for both Saxons and Normans. This movie, you could put in the context of, say, the 1960s. The obviously the with the civil justice or the civil rights movement of that time, and the Saxons and the Normans are whites and blacks, or people that are pro or against segregation, the abolishment of unjust laws for people of color. You could even put this in the context of the time that it took place in during the, the years of World War II, when the Nazis were doing what they were doing to the Jews, to people that they considered undesirables, and so on. And it all, to one degree or another, relate. And I think that's what actually, in a way, makes this movie also timeless. And even putting all that aside, the context of commentary on the society at the time, it's still a great adventure story. It's a great love story. It's got good humor in it. It's got good writing. It's, you know, we look at this now in 2024 and we look at the costumes and we're like, people didn't really dress like that back then, at least to not that extent, except for maybe the nobles or anything. They didn't have the crests and the brightly colored costumes and clothing and everything. But at the same time, to varying degrees, they did. But obviously, all the men didn't wear tights.
Right.
They're not a married man.
They don't
No,
have
no,
a
no. We're
Prince
we're
Adam
straight.
He-Man haircut.
That's true too. I mean, okay. I will say this. Errol Flynn's haircut in this movie. mm, mm, even Prince John's haircut. mm. Now the facial hair, I think the facial hair was appropriate for everybody. Well, obviously the women didn't have any. Obviously,
It was hidden away by their hoods and their hats.
yes, but for all of you that are watching this, I hope this review has incentivizes you to check out The Adventures of Robin Hood, and then eventually, if you've never seen it, watch Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and watch Robin Hood, Men in Tights. Whichever order works best for you. See what inspired Mel Brooks to do a parody of both Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and The Adventures of Robin Hood, because he did that parody out of love, not out of derision. Because he grew up in that era. You have to remember, Mel Brooks is in his late 90s.
Yep.
He probably saw the Adventures of Robin Hood in the theater as a young man. Hence, he's like, okay, I'm going to spoof this, and he did so brilliantly.
Hmm.
Yeah, improve on the 1922 version. Say, I can make this much better. Make the 1939 38 version. Say, okay, let me improve on those two and make my own version.
Yeah, and I will say this: Errol Flynn is by far my to rank all the Robin Hoods I've seen throughout my life. He ranks number one.
Agreed.
Carrie El-
Yeah.
Carrie Elways is a very close second. Kevin Costner is third, and well, we don't speak of Russell Crowe as Robin Hood. That was no.
But we
And
can't count the animated version of the 70s as a fox.
yes, I almost forgot the Disney one. Dang it!
Yeah.
I almost forgot because I love that movie. The other one, there was another one. I didn't. What was the other one? I don't remember now.
I know there was a so-called Disney sequel about Princess of Thieves, but I don't count that one. That's terrible.
No, it was actually I had seen this back in the day when I was a kid, and I think when I was a teenager. Back when Blockbuster still existed.
I
It
remember.
was in the classic movie section. It was called Robin and Marion, and it starred Richard Harrison, I think, as Richard the Lionhearted, Sean Connery as an older Robin, and Audrey Hepburn as Maid Marian.
Okay, I remember hearing about
That
that one.
that one was such a freaking downer because Marion ends up poisoning Robin and herself, and they end up dying in their old years, in their old age.
That's not
That
realistic.
was that was such a freaking downer. I hated that movie. I have never watched it since. I looked at Mother and Bastard. I was like, I'm never watching this again. She's like, I don't blame you. She's like, not a lot of people did because it bombed. But yeah, if you want a good definitive version of Robin Hood, Errol Flynn's, I think, by far one of the best. Even if he can't do a proper English accent.
True.
So, guys, any other thoughts on Robin Hood?
I mean, it's one of my favorite characters, fictional characters, because unfortunately, in the legends that they have, Robin Hood, he did die in one of the stories where his cousin
Mhm.
bled him out, unfortunately. But this one, this film, it feels like it tells like the majority of that legend that I read, basically.
Mhm.
And I don't know, it just feels like it's done right. It feels like the story that I remember reading when I read that novelization later on. I said, this feels like the story that would have taken place, basically.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Jack, any final
Yeah.
thoughts from you? Go ahead.
Um. Yeah. No. It's just as I said. It's. I feel like that's like the definitive Robin Hood film. If you want to watch anything about Robin Hood, um, that would be that. That would be that. And the idea that like you know it would influence like Mel Brooks years and years later, and
Mhm.
I mean it would influence George Lucas. It would influence you know I mean that's a testament to it, to that movie itself, and just the timelessness that it somehow captures.
Yes, very true. So, as for myself, to say I love this movie is an understatement. I mean, it's a movie that me and Mam Ambassador share a passion for. Hence, why she did all the research that she did. God love her, and I mean that most. I mean that most sincerely.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, the cast is one of the best in the history of Hollywood. I mean, you got Errol Flynn, Olivia de Havilland, Claude Rains, um, Basil Rathbone, all who would go on to have and continue to have good, successful careers. One would go on to be a very well known detective, one of the best known detectives in the history of literature. Errol Flynn had a long and storied career. Olivia de Havilland, the same. Claude Rains, the same. So, anyway, guys, I want to thank you both for being here today. Great discussion. I appreciate you both as always. It's always a pleasure to talk film with the both of you. For all of you out there, you know the drill. Like, comment, and of course, if you enjoyed this discussion, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the notifications and all notifications that whenever I go live or I upload one of these reviews, you'll be notified. Of course, follow myself and Alicia and Jack on either X or Instagram. I'm on both. I think you're both on. Are you both on? I know you're both on X because that's how we
Mhm.
talk most often. But you're Alicia. I know you're on Instagram. Jack, are you?
No.
Okay. So you just do X. Fair enough. So, but anyway, folks, that all being said, y'all have a great day. We'll see y'all around, obviously. And as I like to say as I close out, stay ambassadorial. Be yourself. Have a good sense of humor, but never take yourself too seriously. You do all those things, you always have a place in the ambassadorial wing. We'll see you around. Have a good one.